Hi everyone, Mrs. A here. I certainly miss seeing you guys at school every day, but I'm excited to at least get to read you a chapter of Ribsy. I will be reading chapter 6, the first part. All right, it's called The Famous Dog. Henry Huggins was zigzagging down Klickitat Street on his bicycle delivering journals. Out of habit, he glanced back over his shoulder to see what Ribsy was doing. Of course, Ribsy was not there. It had been a month since he had loped after Henry's bicycle, and still Henry could not get over the feeling that Ribsy was following him. A dull, heavy sensation filled Henry, as it always did when he forgot and looked back for Ribsy. Henry flung a journal extra hard. A month. Ribsy could have chewed through a dozen ropes and dug under a dozen fences. The girls who gave him the bubble bath did not live more than 10 miles away. A healthy dog like Ribsy did not need a month to walk 10 miles, even if he did have to stop and chew through a rope or two and tunnel his way under a few fences. Even allowing for a dog fight now and then, it should not take Ribsy a month to walk 10 miles. Hi, Henry. It was Henry's friend, Beezus, walking down the street with her little sister, Ramona. Ramona was busy stepping on all the cracks just to show she wasn't afraid of breaking her mother's back. Has Ribsy come home yet? Asked Beezus. Nope. Henry paused by the curb, even though he did not feel like talking about Ribsy, not even with Beezus, who, for a girl, was very sensible. Ribsy was such a nice dog, said Beezus. Ramona stopped stepping on cracks. Why don't you get a horse instead? She asked. Oh, Ramona, don't be silly, said Beezus. Henry couldn't keep a horse in the city. It'd look pretty funny delivering papers with a horse, or I'd look pretty funny delivering papers with a horse following me, said Henry. You could ride him, Ramona pointed out. Henry felt a little ridiculous. Of course he would ride a horse if he had a horse. He would gallop down Klickitat Street, flinging papers from his saddlebags. He would be something like Paul Revere. Muttered Henry, wondering how Ramona had managed to get him off on such a wild train of thought. I don't want a horse. I do, Ramona went on, stepping on cracks. Henry pedaled slowly, leaning to the right and then to the left as if pushing bicycle pedals was hard work. Ribsy was not coming back. He knew it now. He might as well stop telephoning the Humane Society and leaving food in the dish on the back porch. He might as well throw away the old tennis ball. Maybe Ribsy had found a home he liked better. Maybe he'd found a home with some rich boy who fed him T-bone steaks instead of canned dog food and horse meat. Maybe the rich boy's mother let him sleep on the foot of the rich boy's bed. Maybe the rich boy's family let him ride in their new car all the time without making him chase through the rain first. While the piano in Sailor's living room went plink, plunk, plunk, Ribsy sat down in front of the refrigerator in Sailor's kitchen. Joe, who was turning out to be the kind of boy Ribsy expected him to be, obligingly opened the refrigerator door and, after looking around, helped himself to a handful of raw hamburger, which he held out to Ribsy. Mrs. Sailor's voice came from the living room. Is that you, Junior? Yeah, answered Joe above the plink, plunk, plunk of the piano. Only then did he remember to slam the refrigerator door. What are you doing in the refrigerator? Asked his mother as the piano stopped plinking and plunking. I'm not in the refrigerator. I'm in the kitchen. Joe laughed at his own joke and did not bother to mention that he was feeding a stray dog who was gobbling the raw meat out of his hand. None of your back talk. Where have you been all this time? Go on, Darlene. Go on with your practicing. I was worried sick about you, said Mrs. Sailor. I went to the high school football game like I told you, answered Joe, as Ribsy finished the last of the hamburger and licked his hand to make sure he hadn't missed any. I asked if I could go, and all you said was we didn't have any money for football games, and I didn't need money, so I went. How did you get in? Asked Mrs. Sailor. Go on, Darlene. Same way I always do, answered Joe, wiping his hand on the seat of his pants and going into the living room. Ribsy stayed behind to lick his chops. I hung around until one of the gatekeepers let me go in. Nobody cared. The stadium is never full for high school games. "Joe Sailor Jr.," exclaimed his mother. "Just look at you. Now tie your shoe and tuck your shirt tail in and go wash your face. And Darlene, go on with the Pussycat Waltz. I'm not paying out perfectly good money for your piano lessons and then not to have you practice." Mrs. Sailor was inclined to be snappish when she was trying to get Darlene to practice. Ribsy was curious about these people in the living room, so he followed Joe to investigate. A girl a couple of years ago, younger than Joe, was sitting on a round piano stool. She was a thin, wiry girl who appeared to be all knees, elbows, and ponytail. Her hair was full of a plastic bandeau, plastic barrettes, a plastic clasp around her ponytail. Mrs. Sailor was standing beside her, pointing to the music on the piano and saying, "Here I scrimp and pinch to give you guys piano lessons." Then she saw Ribsy. "Joe Sailor Jr., what is that dog doing in my house?" she demanded. Ribsy knew from the way she pointed at him that she was talking about him. He distrusted the tone of her voice and his tail drooped. "I don't know," Joe shrugged his shoulders. "He just followed me." He was watching his sister twirl around on the piano stool with her ponytail flying. If she twirled in the same direction long enough, the top of the stool would come unscrewed and she would fall over. Darlene, however, had it nicely timed. Just as the stool was about to topple, she began to twirl in the opposite direction. "Well, he can just follow you right out," snapped his mother, who was finding her son exasperating. Joe heaved a gusty sigh. "Oh, all right. Come on, dog." Obediently, Ribsy followed Joe to the back door and allowed himself to be let out. "Don't mind her," whispered Joe, whose shirt tail was still hanging out. "She just talks that way when she's trying to make old Darlene practice." The hamburger in Ribsy's stomach was filling but cold. Not having anything better to do, he sat down on the back porch. He liked Joe, and he liked hamburger, so he decided he might as well stay for another meal. If he sat by the door long enough, the boy was sure to come out again. Plink, plunk, plunk went the piano once more. As the chill left the hamburger in his stomach, Ribsy curled up beside the washing machine and dozed off until the angry woman's voice inside the kitchen woke him. "Joe Sailor Jr.," she was saying, "do you mean to say you fed perfectly good hamburger to a dog? Why, that was our supper. Now what are we going to have?" The piano's playing stopped. "Mama, can we have pizza pie?" Darlene asked eagerly. "I'll go to the store. It's after dark, and besides, I don't have money for a pizza pie," answered her mother crossly. "Just wait till your father hears about this." Ribsy did not care for the sound of an angry voice, so he got up, shook himself, and took a stroll around the neighborhood. He barked at a smug-looking cat sitting on the porch. When it did not budge, he went on his way. It was no fun to try and chase a cat that would not run. He exchanged sniffs and tail wags with a couple of dogs who did not seem to mind his being there, and after he had satisfied himself that the neighborhood was reasonably friendly, he trotted back to the sailor's house and curled up by the washing machine again. The smell of macaroni and cheese came from the kitchen did not tempt him because his stomach was full of hamburger, so he went to sleep. In the morning, when he heard people stirring in the kitchen and smelled coffee, Ribsy sat hopefully by the back door, waiting for someone to open it. He even whimpered a few times, but there was so much noise inside with people arguing, the radio playing, and Darlene dawdling over the practicing she hadn't finished the day before that no one heard him. Mrs. Sailor had not forgotten about the hamburger, and he fed perfectly good hamburger to a stray dog. She could not get over it. Sometimes I wonder what goes on in that boy's head. "Kids like dogs," said a man's voice. "Maybe we should get him one." Plink, plunk, plunk, plink, plunk, plunk. "Now that isn't just like a man," said Mrs. Sailor. "I have enough trouble buying groceries for 4 people and paying for Darlene's piano lessons and making payments on the TV without taking on a dog." "It is now 34 minutes past 7, said the radio. "Look," said the man, "I've got trouble of my own. One of the best customers brings a dress in to be cleaned, and now I can't find the belt. If I don't find that belt by the time she comes in to get her dress this afternoon, I'm going to lose her business, and we can't afford that. The dog is gone and we didn't starve, so forget it. It is now 35 minutes past 7, said the radio. But the dog was not gone, as Joe discovered when, sometime later, he barged out the back door with his lunch bag in hand. He was going so fast he fell over Ribsy and dropped his lunch, which Ribsy began to sniff. His nose detected the fragrance of bologna. Joe picked himself up and rescued his lunch. You still hanging around? He asked as he started off to school. Ribsy followed close to Joe with his nose against his lunch bag. Joe understood. He opened the bag and took out half a bologna sandwich, which he handed to Ribsy, who wolfed it down before he caught up with Joe. He enjoyed following a boy to school again and pranced along with his ears and tail erect. When they reached the school, Joe pointed to a sign on the metal fence around the school yard. See, it says no dogs allowed. He stooped to pet Ribsy before he went through the gate. Ribsy sat down for an enjoyable 20 minutes of watching what went on inside. Girls jumped rope or played kickball. Boys tossed a ball back and forth or chased one another. Girls squealed, boys yelled, and Ribsy barked. It was a very pleasant interval until the buzzing of a bell put an end to it, and all the boys and girls disappeared into the building. Ribsy then explored the neighborhood by daylight, took a nap by the schoolyard fence, and spent recess and lunch period watching the boys and girls. Several times, Joe spoke to him through the fence. The day seemed familiar to Ribsy because he had followed its same pattern with Henry Huggins so many times. After school, he followed Joe home, just as he had followed Henry many times. It all seemed so natural that Ribsy was beginning to forget Henry and to feel that he belonged to Joe. Joe seemed pleased to have Ribsy at his heels. Before he opened the back door, he whispered, "Come on in and let's see what happens." Ribsy followed Joe into the kitchen, where Mrs. Saylor was ironing. "Junior, tuck your shirt tail. Is that dog still here?" she demanded. This time, Joe tucked his shirt tail in. "I guess he likes it here." "Don't you think he belongs to someone?" asked Mrs. Saylor. "He sure doesn't act like it when he started following me around in the stadium," said Joe. Ribsy wagged his tail. Mrs. Saylor had not sounded as cross as she had the day before when she was worn out trying to get Darlene to practice. "How do you expect to feed a dog?" Mrs. Saylor wanted to know. "He's only a medium-sized dog," Joe pointed out, "and I found 21 cents in the stadium after the football game." 21 cents? How far do you think 21 cents will go these days? His mother asked. "It ought to buy one can of dog food." Mrs. Saylor shook her head and sighed, but she did not order Ribsy out of the house. "Are we going to keep him?" asked Darlene when she came home from school a few minutes later and found Ribsy in the kitchen. "Ask your father," answered her mother. "Now wash your hands and practice your piano lesson." That evening, Ribsy was served a supper of beets, cold leftover macaroni and cheese, and a crust of bread and margarine that Darlene refused to eat, even if eating crusts was supposed to make her hair curly. Ribsy, who was not a choosy dog, had eaten meals that he enjoyed more. After supper, he slipped into the living room and curled up on the carpet. He might as well assume he was welcome until someone told him he was not. Mr. Saylor settled back in his favorite chair, the one with the sagging springs, to read the evening paper while Mrs. Saylor occupied herself pasting her blue chip stamps in a little book. Mr. Saylor was in good humor because he had found the belt of his customer's dress that day. Joe sat down on the floor in front of the television set to watch a detective program. Darlene chose that moment to practice the Pussycat Waltz. "Dad, make her stop," said Joe. "She hasn't practiced all day, and the minute I want to look at the TV, she has to start banging." "I'm not banging," said Darlene, and added, "Your old program bothers me when I'm practicing plink, plunk, plunk." She made a great show of sitting up straight and holding her wrists up properly while she played. "You're just trying to be a pest," Joe informed her, "and to get out of doing your homework. Plink, plunk, plunk, Dad Junie's bothering me when I'm trying to practice. Darlene knew it, especially annoyed her brother to be called Junie. Cut it out, you kids, Mr. Saylor was paying very little attention to his children. He was used to bickering. Pest, hissed Joe. Gunfire rattled from the television set. You're the pest, said Darlene without missing a beat. Won't let me practice in peace. Ha, said her brother. Darlene didn't fool him 1 minute. Ribsy did not care for the piano playing, but he did not mind the bickering. He had heard the boys and girls in his neighborhood talk the same tone of voice many times. Suddenly, Mr. Saylor looked up from his paper. All right, well, that's the end of part 1 of chapter 6. Thank you guys. Miss you. Bye.